This is Chapter 6 of Paul Bahn's Archaeology, A Very Short Introduction, Settlement and Society. Humans have always lived in a variety of types of site, from dung heaps to palaces, and it is an important aspect of archaeology to determine what kind of settlement people occupied. It is only after discovering this basic information that one can move on to more complex questions involving the type of society that they lived in. But what exactly is a site in an archaeologist's view? Basically, it is any spot on the landscape with detectable traces of human activity, or what an archaeologist believes to be human activity. So if you find some flint tools in a plowed field or stone axes in the Sahara, the spot automatically becomes a site. Of course, not all sites are dwelling places. For example, they may be butchering areas or quarries for raw materials or burials or monuments or rock art sites or sacred places where worship took place occasionally. Dwellings, even short-term ones, tend to have a diagnostic collection of traces, not only artifacts but also features, i.e. non-portable elements, structures, and a range of organic and environmental remains. In particular, one would usually expect to find a fireplace. Home is where the hearth is, after all. Occupation sites range from minor scatters of artifacts denoting a brief encampment of a few hours to the enormous tells or mounds in the Near East where the remains of successive towns or cities are piled up on top of each other and span thousands of years. In order to ask the right questions of the materials and to devise the means to answer them, one needs to assess the size or scale of the society and what its internal organization was. There is little point in searching for signs of complex, centralized organization in a hunter-gatherer camp. So, the first step requires examination of individual sites and of the relationships between them. For example, the settlement pattern. Archaeologists love to divide their data into different categories for the sake of simplicity and how to make the huge morass of information more manageable. When chronology is concerned, Chapter 2, they tend to go for three-part systems, such as early, middle, late, or lower, middle, upper. For societies, however, a fourfold classification tends to be used, each associated with particular kinds of site and settlement patterns. As with all archaeological terms, such as hand axe, Upper Paleolithic, Neanderthal, Greek vase, beaker folk, or whatever, the names are descriptive, hypothetical, and completely artificial with little basis in reality, but they do serve as a convenient shorthand so that other archaeologists know to which period or type of object or kind of society you are referring. The four very broad categories are bands, segmentary societies, sometimes called tribes, chiefdoms, and states. As with archaeology's chronological divisions, these are simply arbitrary points in a continuum, and it is often very hard to assign a culture to one rather than the next, since some features appear before others. Just as nobody in the Ice Age said, "I'm bored with the Middle Paleolithic. Isn't it about time we started the Upper?" It is likewise hard to imagine an early farmer announcing to his neighbors, "I just want to warn you that, as from the next full moon, I intend to assume the powers of leader and transform our cozy little segmentary society into a modern, thrusting chiefdom at the cutting edge of progress." 1. Bands denote small-scale societies of hunters, gatherers, and fishers, usually numbering less than 100 people. They often move around with the seasons, exploiting primarily or exclusively wild resources, so their sites tend to be seasonally occupied camps, together with smaller, more specialized areas such as kill or butchery sites, or work sites for making tools, often of stone. Depending on their surroundings, they live in cave entrances or rock shelters, or construct temporary shelters of organic materials such as wood, bones, or hide. The base camps are generally more substantial than the temporary or specialized sites. This kind of settlement is associated with Paleolithic period of the Old World and the Paleo-Indian period of the New. 2. Tribes are larger than bands, numbering up to a few thousand people, and they tend to be settled farmers, though some are pastoralists with a mobile economy. Either way, their life is based primarily on domesticated resources, plants, and/or animals. They occupy settled agricultural homesteads or villages, which are collectively form a settlement pattern of fairly evenly spaced sites of similar size. In other words, there is no settlement that appears to dominate. This kind of system is associated with the first farmers of both the Old and New World. 3. It is in chiefdoms, which normally range between 5,000 and 20,000 people, that the first real signs of different social statuses become apparent, though some rich graves are known even from the last ice age. They are based on a ranking system, with prestige determined by how closely related one is to the chief, so there is no true class structure as yet. It is the chief who is the linchpin of the whole system, employing craft specialists and redistributing to his retainers and subjects the offerings of crafts and foodstuffs that are periodically paid to him. It is usually a he. Naturally, chiefs and their relatives or chums tend to have very rich grave goods buried with them. Chiefdoms generally have a center of power, with temples, chiefly residences, and craft specialists. This permanent ceremonial center, designed for ritual, is a central focus for the population, but it is not a city with a bureaucracy. Those are features that are associated with the fourth and last stage. 4. Early states are hard to differentiate from chiefdoms, but the ruler, now a king or queen, sometimes deified, now has authority to establish laws and enforce them with an army. Society is now stratified into different classes, with the farm workers and poor urban dwellers at the bottom, the craft specialists somewhere in the middle, and the priests and relatives of the rulers at the top. Of course, taxes are paid. In the midst of life, we are in debt, so inevitably a bureaucracy is required in the central capital to administer such things. The complex redistribution of tribute and revenue to government, army, and craft specialists is one of the crucial features. Archaeologically, one can identify an urban settlement pattern with cities playing a prominent role, typically a large population center with more than 5,000 inhabitants and containing big public buildings and temples. One can often perceive a settlement hierarchy with the capital at the heart of a network of subsidiary centers and small villages. Archaeologists normally obtain their information about settlement pattern from a thorough study of what has already been found in the area over the years. However, in terra incognita, or in a region where a really thorough picture is required, the solution comes from a survey, i.e. having a territory or a representative sample of it if the size is excessive or if time and funds are insufficient, walked systematically by a team, usually of long-suffering students or volunteers, in order to record all archaeological traces that are visible on the surface. The concentration of material and their type gives some indication of the kind of sites involved, their size, time span, and number, and in some cases of the hierarchy of settlements. They may be given provisional labels such as regional center, local center, village, hamlet, homestead, base camp, or specialized activity area. Some archaeologists have extended this approach to cover whole landscapes. For them, especially where mobile groups are concerned, it is no longer sufficient to locate an individual site or even a series of sites. They also indulge in what has become known as off-site or non-site archaeology. Unkind tongues have been known to refer to these off-site and nonsense archaeology, seeking the sparse scatters of artifacts, perhaps only one or two, if that, in a 10-meter square, that occur between the recognizable sites, in order to emphasize the fairly obvious fact that hunter-gatherers move around and exploit entire landscapes, and are liable to use and lose artifacts all over the place. Naturally, the task of assessing settlement and society is far easier for those periods and cultures where we have written documents or even maps. These can answer many of the questions we might have about society and settlement.